I'm Jeff Lieberman. I'm moderating this event. Really glad to have these speakers with me. We're here to talk, obviously, about teen temptations. Fun for me because not having a real background in the health industry, it's something I can still relate to. We've all been there. We've all wanted to have sex when we were 16 years old. We wanted to eat sweet foods when we got home from school. There's a lot of pressure from drugs in high school. And before we get into the specifics of the programs that exist right now to deal with those temptations, I just want to kind of give us a little background perspective on the fact that these temptations are genetic. The fact is, we've had these temptations because they are responsible for getting us here in the first place. You know, for 99% of our evolutionary history, we were hungry. We were always searching for food. And until the development of things like agriculture and cooking, we never had enough food. If you found food, you were supposed to eat the food. So trying to resist those temptations is a fundamental cultural versus genetic real issue. And a lot of the programs that try to deal with things like eating, things like drugs, and things like safe sex didn't make sense, 1,000 years ago or 10,000 years ago. And when we really see things in the scope of the true evolutionary history of humanity, the problem is very, very real. And the early programs that tried to deal with these temptations didn't address them at all. They tried to address them with fear, with misinformation, total lies. When I was in high school and I was learning about drugs, I then went home on the internet and found out that everything I was being told was a lie. And this had been known for 50 years, but it was still being thrown out in the high schools. And, how are we actually supposed to convince people to get rid of temptations that they should be having? And the thing I'm really excited about here is these programs seem to have taken a shift in the last couple decades, where instead of trying to push away the temptations that we all naturally have as humans, we are trying to come to terms with them, understand where they come from, and actually leverage the things about us that are human to change our behavior. So, for example, the abstinence programs of the last 40, 50 years, not so effective because people want to have sex. And they're supposed to want to have sex when they're 16 because for most of our history, that's when you had kids. So all of a sudden, we live twice as long, and we have sexually transmitted diseases. And only because of those two factors has culture needed to make this shift. And before that, your biology is going to dominate at all times. So we're going to look today at, we're going to focus on cigarettes and safe sex and healthy eating habits. But this stretches to, all aspects of humanity. Finally, with an understanding of where we come from, we can really take advantage of who we are and change our behavior for the positive. So the three guests, starting at my far right, Chuck Connor is President and CEO of the American Lung Association, working to save lives by improving lung health and preventing lung disease. He previously was VP for Communication and Marketing at the Red Cross. He was also principal for client strategy at the Dillon Schneider Group in Chicago and was first director for public affairs for the federal judiciary in Washington, D.C. Prior to that, he served for 25 years as a United States Navy officer, leaving with the rank of captain. In between Daphne and Chuck, we have Cecile, who is the president of Planned Parenthood Action Fund and Planned Parenthood Federation of America. Before this, she served as Deputy Chief of Staff for Democratic leader Nancy Pelosi and was a key role in her election as Democratic leader in the House of Representatives. She has a long history in support of reproductive freedom and social justice, and 5 years ago founded and served as president of America Votes, a coalition of 42 national membership-based organizations working to maximize voter registration, education, and mobilization efforts at the grassroots level. And the funniest thing about my interaction with Cecile so far, she doesn't even know this, is that when I got her contact information and tried to reach her, it was the 800 Planned Parenthood number. And so I was offered condoms instead of offered communication with her. So I'm glad to finally get to talk in person with her. Next to me is Daphne Oz, who you might know from last night's talk, and she's the author of the bestseller Dorm Room Diet and the DVD Dorm Room Diet Workout, which involved her ex-boyfriend and sister, I learned last night. A recent graduate of Princeton, she's a certified health advisor through the Institute of Integrative Nutrition and was a featured speaker at the 2008 California Governor's Women's Conference hosted by Maria Shriver. She has been in loads of different media and is working on several new projects that we'll maybe get into soon. So I just want to open it up, open question to all three of you. How have the programs shifted in the last 30 years, and what are we now doing to combat, the major pressures that teens face? Safe sex, drugs, including primarily cigarettes, and healthy eating habits. Let's start with John.
Sure. Thank you very much. The American Lung Association believes that the greatest threats to American teens today lie in tobacco. Over 3,600 kids try their first cigarette each day, and about 1,300 of those kids become lifelong smokers. 80% of adult smokers today became smokers before they were 18. Tobacco companies spend a tremendous amount of marketing each year, and it's a clearly prey on our nation's youth, and we found proof of that some years ago in the so-called Master Settlement Agreement when all the states sued the tobacco companies and had the huge judgment, and the tobacco industry had to turn over many documents, and the documents were made clear that the industry as a whole regards teens as their replacement generation for the smokers who they've already killed. So clearly this is in the open, and I'm going to quote you a few things here, too. We just, maybe a month ago, the U.S. Court of Appeals in the District of Columbia upheld a trial court decision from 2006 about the conduct of the tobacco companies with respect to teens. And I'll just quote you from the appeals court decision. Is guilty of civil racketeering. The decision said defendants spent enormous resources tracking the behaviors and preferences of youth under 21 to start young people smoking and to keep them smoking. Happily, just a couple weeks ago, after 10 years of effort, we targeted as customers the tobacco industry. They're exposed to a constant and insidious barrage of advertising where they live, where they learn, and where they play. Most insidiously, they are offered products with flavorings that mask the taste of tobacco and make it even more tempting. So this is something that escapes the notice of a lot of Americans, but it's truly a scandal in our view. As I said, the tobacco companies spend heavily on marketing. They spend $13 billion a year, and most of that money goes to the brands that are most favored by teens: Marlboro, Camel, and Newport. They're the real brands preferred by youth. And as I said a minute ago, I'm sure that most of you don't know this, but there are cigarettes available now that are candy flavored, that have things like whether they're made to look like candy to get kids to start smoking and to really like it. Now, not surprisingly, it's the kids who are most price sensitive when it comes to cigarettes. We've talked about tax policy here in the last few days, but we know for sure is when you increase the tax on cigarettes 10%, teen smoking goes down 7%. So that's a good thing to keep in mind in the public policy debate. Tobacco companies also work very hard to make their product seem glamorous, and they especially market to girls. The premier product is a product called Camel No. 9. You may have seen that at the 7-Eleven. It's colored pink, hot pink, real colors, teals, and they've also used this a few years ago in conjunction with promotion efforts which have cell phone jewelry that teenage girls are attracted to. In June of 2008, the National Cancer Institute released a report describing how tobacco companies advertise and target specific populations. And here's what NCI said. They said that the target specific population groups such as youth and young adults by employing themes and messages that resonate with them. For example, tobacco companies use advertising suggesting the smoking can satisfy adolescent needs to be popular, feel attractive, take risks, and avoid or manage stress. So as I said, happily we have a new law that will enable the FDA not to put tobacco industry out of business, sadly, but almost everything except that. For sure, it allows the FDA to ban candy-flavored cigarettes. which is a very, very good thing. Now, to answer your question, Jeff, what is the American Lung Association doing about it? We have two excellent programs targeted to teens. One is to get teens off cigarettes, and it's called Not on Tobacco. And we've helped over 150,000 teens participate in this program. We target teens between the age of 14 and 19, and we've had a pretty good success rate, a quit rate about 25 to 30%. So that's very good. And we also have a program called Teens Against Tobacco, which tries to get teens not to smoke in the first place. And that has been successful. If you get teens really excited about something, they really go after it. And we're very, very happy with that program as well. Let me talk a little bit about parents. The best way to make sure kids don't smoke is make sure there's no smoking in the household. There's a high correlation between smoking parents and smoking teens. And we found a particular problem here. Teens really need to be open with their parents. Many of our schools who participate in our programs require a permission slip, and many teens don't want to tell their parents that they smoke. So this is really an impediment. So I think our strategy is to tell teens the truth, tell teens how they're manipulated. We don't want to scare them, but if you tell them the truth, we think that that will change their behavior. So thank you very much, Jeff.
Okay, can we go next?
Sure.
All right, so it's great to be here, and I was thrilled to hear that sort of what this panel was described as really trying to create the healthiest generation ever. And I actually think that's something we've been doing at Planned Parenthood, is really to think about how do we go further upstream and not just deal with women when they're already in their childbearing years, but how do we really actually begin to work with young people much earlier on to give them the tools they need to have healthy lives. And so I'm thrilled that you're doing this panel. Unlike Chuck, we can't just tell people not to have sex for the rest of their lives, and so I think it's a good idea. It doesn't really work in the sex arena, and in fact, it's kind of interesting because it's called like a teen temptation. It's almost, even that word, I would say, sort of is part of the problem here, which is. I think our fundamental problem in this country is that none of us talk openly about sex and sexuality and healthy sexuality. And so it's no wonder that if we can't have these conversations with each other or with our partners, that we can't have them with our kids. And so I think that it's partly the whole thing of that sex is taboo and that it's a temptation to be resisted, as opposed to being able to talk in a more open way about sex just sort of being a normal part of life. And that for young people, that to have sexual feelings and to have questions about sexual identity in sexuality is actually really normal and healthy, and we can just have open conversations. And I think the more that we do that, I think if there's nothing else I would leave here with, it's that this is the role of getting kids to be healthier about sex isn't the role of Planned Parenthood or your local public school. It's about all of us. So we do an enormous amount of work with teens. We're the largest sex educator in America, and work with young people across the country. And I think that we all know, I'm looking around the room and thinking a lot of you probably are parents, and some of you may even have teenagers like I do. So you know that sexually explicit material is available everywhere. I like to think that, I'm going to date myself, but when I grew up, we watched the Dick Van Dyke Show on TV, and the Petries didn't even sleep in the same bed. Now, my kids, I really think about it, right? My kids are growing up with Gossip Girl, the OC, just any show where kids are having sex all the time. It's in music, it's in movies, and yet we are absolutely not having any better conversations, I think, today than we probably did when I grew up with my parents. And I'm not going to embarrass anyone in the room, but if I asked you all to raise your hands if you had really open, honest conversations with your kids about sex, it would probably be embarrassing. So I'm not going to make you do that, but I think that really is it's sort of a fundamental issue. And yet, kids want to talk to someone about sex. That's the other thing that I think is a big myth. There was an interesting study last year, which of 13 to 24-year-olds, about what are their biggest concerns on health and wellness, including mental health issues, for them to say what are the things that concern them the most. Their number one concern is getting an STD. Their second concern is drugs, and their third concern is unplanned pregnancy. So these are the issues that kids are concerned about themselves. And in fact, if you look at what's happening in this country, it's for good reason. We still have the highest unintended teen pregnancy rate of any Western industrialized country. 750,000 teenagers will get pregnant this year in the United States, and the vast majority of them unplanned. And according to the CDC, which really tracks a number of these issues, 1 in 4 teenage girls has a sexually transmitted infection today. And if you're an African-American teenage girl, it's 1 in 2. So the concerns of kids and the reality is not that different. So we've got to find a way to have much more open and honest conversations. I think changing public policy is going to help, but we've also got to reach kids where they are. And I'll just give you one quick example. We've been doing a lot more work at Planned Parenthood online because we believe that for my kids, if it's not online, they don't find it out. And if it is online, they're going to find it. So we now see at Planned Parenthood, we see 3 million patients a year through our doors. We see 500,000 teens each month coming to us online for information. And the other day, there's a young woman from San Diego, just to give you an example, who's typed into us, we do an open chat, typed into us, and she said, I had sex with my boyfriend 3 nights ago. I think I might be pregnant. Now, mind you, the person on the other end, she has no idea who it is, right? This is not a friend. This is not she just knows it's someone at Planned Parenthood. So our health educator emails her back and says, well, you still might be a candidate for emergency contraception, the morning after pill. And so she emails back, well, this is what's going on with me. And she says, so then our person says, and of course, all this anonymous, where do you live? Well, we find out she lives near a clinic. So we're able to send back to her, well, here's the information, and I'll set you up an appointment. You can go in and take emergency contraception. Anyway, I could give you a million examples, but this young woman, Debbie, this meant there was no one in her life, not a teacher, not a pastor, not even a girlfriend, that she felt like she could go to and say, like, I don't want to get pregnant, but I had unprotected sex. What can I do? And so, to me, it's the story is we've got to understand that if this is a young woman who's coming to us online, and again, there's thousands of them each month, we aren't really taking seriously what kids are asking us to do. And it means, I think, as a society, we just have to begin to really address this in a much more positive, less shaming way, and much more openly about what kids need. And we've got to engage kids in basically solving this problem as well. So there's plenty to talk about this. I'm thrilled you're having this panel. I hope we can have a real conversation about, I think, what we're hearing from kids and what I think we can do to make a difference in their lives. Thanks.
Thank you. I think it's wonderful that we can combine these 3 fronts of really different challenges that teenagers today face, and I think it's wonderful that they're being combined because the estimates for smoking deaths, 4.9 million people die each year as a result in the world. We just heard 1 in 2 African American females are infected with some kind of STD. These are really huge numbers, and the CDC released numbers that 400,000 obesity-related deaths occurred in 2000 alone, and that was 9 years ago, so you can only imagine what the figures are today with ever-increasing waistlines and childhood diabetes and cancer rates and other illnesses just blossoming as we speak here today. But I think that one thing that both of these organizations have done very well that I think has been perhaps undervalued in the obesity epidemic has been peer-to-peer education. I think that's something that's incredibly successful. I think kids learn really well from each other. I've had this experience, certainly. And I think that it's something that we really need to harness, especially on college campuses, which is what I'm going to talk about specifically today, because I think that it's an environment where kids are really open to change and to challenge, and I think that there's a huge potential there to have really healthy habits formed for a lifetime of health and success. So why is there this obesity epidemic today? We talked quite a bit at a couple of panels I've been to about this overload of information that Americans have, and yet we still suffer with these problems. What is the disconnect? Why aren't we able to translate it into action? And I think that there are a couple of problems. One is that the cards are stacked against us. We have this. Obesity is a complex reaction to an environment that suggests a high energy intake and a low energy output. We have energy saving devices that basically mean you spend your entire day sitting, and we have high energy foods, in your Doritos bag and in your granola bars and in everything else that you just constantly snack on it, it's difficult to manage that energy input, energy output ratio. I think that also for a long time, again, getting back to educators' responsibility in this role, and that includes parents, but it also, I think, should really be harnessed in a school system where kids spend 8 hours a day. And really, I think it's imperative at an early age, like Ms. Richards was talking about, to really get to these kids and talk about health early on enough that they don't have their habit-forming years completely predominated by steak dinners every night and other unhealthy habits that Americans have adopted. So we have this idea that perhaps it falls outside the educator's purview to address issues like obesity and health and weight gain. And I think part of it is, again, addressing a taboo that still exists around talking about people being overweight. I think that teachers sometimes are afraid to address students who, you can watch them literally growing over the course of a year, and you wonder why. Maybe it's the stress at home, maybe it's issues they're having with friends, and you don't want to probe, but you also recognize that this is setting them up for a lifetime of serious health problems. And then once these kids get to college, they address an entire new slew of environmental issues. You're eating while you're studying, you're eating around friends constantly, you don't have your parents prepare foods for you. These are all really big stressors that kids have to face on their own, probably for the first time ever. And if there's no one there and there's no mechanism for the school to address, well, these are challenges that deserve to be really taken on almost as any other subject would in a college campus forum. And especially, I think, within a peer-to-peer educational group. So if you look at college campuses today, we have certainly Planned Parenthood organizations, we have LGBT programs, we have anti-smoking programs, we have substance abuse programs. How many of your children or grandchildren or nieces or nephews go to schools where they have sustainable agriculture groups, where they have educational eating groups, where they have even a cooking class, something where kids can start to really take advantage of this learning experience? I would venture to say not many. And I think that trend is going to have to change if we really want to make sure that kids are going out into the world with the strongest background to make sure that their adult life is really a healthy one. And I think that's what we're talking about here today, is building this generation, the regeneration generation, to bring together what our parents learned, but what they maybe failed to put into action, and really just start to make it a reality for ourselves. So I want to talk a little bit about what's going on today on college campuses in particular, and how some advances are being made and where we can maybe go further with those. So Cornell's a great example. They have a sustainable campus. They harness foods from around their campus. They've partnered a farm-to-school program. They have sustainable agricultural groups. They have every day in the cafeteria, they have access to all kinds of fresh tomatoes from a local farm. They have lettuces. They have all different kinds of whole foods constantly available to them. And what they've seen actually is not only a growth of awareness and students understanding, where does my food come from, how is it grown, was it grown safely, but also even in the cafeteria staff. And they're taking that back to their families and spreading it around their environments and their homes, which I think is a huge development and really cool in the way that it can spread virally that way. I think also we have Sodexo, which is a huge supplier of foods out in the Midwest and Northwest, or Pacific Northwest, $5.5 billion annually in food services. They've just partnered with Food Alliance, which is a certifier of organic foods and sustainable agriculture out there, and they are actually producing a program that will provide sustainable agricultural and locally produced and seasonally produced produce to campuses in that area, which I think is wonderful. And I think something that probably is cost saving in terms of transportation, because you're bringing foods from 10 miles away as opposed to like the 5,000 food miles that lettuce and broccoli that reaches us in New York from California will have traveled. And I think that that's something that a lot of campuses need to look at, renegotiating their food contracts and holding their food suppliers to much higher standards. When you have American companies like Wendy's, like McDonald's, like Burger King, like these huge suppliers of quite unhealthy food, demanding no trans fats, in some cases bringing salad bars in, they are clearly responding to a demand of the millennial generation, which has a huge purchasing power. And I think that college campuses should only be more vigilant and demand more from their food suppliers. So I talked a bit about the Farms to School programs, which I think should be implemented on more college campuses, and the Cornell one being an excellent example of that. But I think that something that's really cool right now is a declaration that's being passed around to a variety of college campuses called the Real Food Declaration, real food being the intersection of sustainable, local, seasonal, all these different food movements, really trying to demand of their colleges that they start to focus on teenagers being able to function optimally when they're provided with good food. So you'll have better students, better focused in class, performing better, becoming better advocates of your school once they graduate. It only makes sense. And what this declaration demands, I'm just going to read you their 5 main points. College campuses should focus on seasonality and availability of locally produced foods. They should have wide recycling and composting programs that reduce the amount of waste that colleges produce on a yearly basis. They should have more academic programs available to students to learn where their food's coming from and how they can get involved. They should have college farms and agricultural communities so that kids can start to learn early on. And they should have students that graduate with this idea of stewardship over the land. Colleges have $4 billion of annual spending on food alone. They should really, I think, be using that to better their students and to better the surrounding environments as much as possible.
All right, I have a bunch of questions. I want to make sure that as early as you guys have questions, just raise your hands. We'll try to make this as conversational as possible. But I'd like to start by talking about parents. It seems like if parents had been doing the right thing for the last 30 years and they all knew what to do and they all cared, you guys would be out of business and we all be having a great time. How much of this comes down to the parents just not knowing? How much of it comes down to them being afraid of sharing this information, breaking taboos, misinformation on their part? I remember my parents telling me sexual information and me correcting them. And this was the first sexual conversation that we had.
Whatever.
And
Yeah.
I was like, I have the internet.
Yeah.
You've got nothing. You've gone to my store, and not to offend any parents. But it goes from that kind of, we have the wrong information, we don't know how to transfer it, but also taboos. I mean, we come from a very sexually taboo society, especially. And just a small anecdote that we discussed earlier was a friend of mine has a 4-year-old, and they still use condoms because they're not trying to have another one. And he found them under the sink, and he asked her, "What is this?" And so she had, 2 seconds to make the decision. Do I wait 10 more years to talk about this, or do I talk right now when he's 4 years old? Mm-hmm. She said, "This is a condom. When we have sex, there are germs in our bodies that can get transferred from one person to another." She opened it up. She let him try it on. He said, "This is way too big." She said, "When you're ready, it'll fit you." And 6 months later, they were walking in Austin, Texas, and there was a condom in the middle of the street, and a used one, and he pointed to it and he said, "That's dirty, Mom." So I feel like breaking that taboo goes against everything we learn in society, and yet instantly fixes the problem. He's never going to have an issue buying condoms in a crowded line at the store. He's never going to have an issue wearing one. It's totally second nature to his life, but it goes against everything we learn.
Yeah. And thank God it was Austin. No, it's what's funny because I had a very similar experience with my son when he was very young. And boys are much more mechanical. They just want to know how does it work? What is this thing for? And so it's always a little bit different for I think boys and girls. Of course, my daughters are just totally red, and they no, I don't want to hear. But I think the point is, parents are. It's interesting. Parents desperately, one, they want sex education taught in school. The way, more than 90% of parents want sex education taught in school. So unfortunately, too, we had sort of public policy that didn't really reflect, I think, what parents need and want. I think we're beginning, under the leadership of the administration, to begin to change that. So at least we're going to kind of match up more closely with what folks want. Parents feel completely unprepared. They don't know. And in fact, all the programs we do, the parents are really actually the best sex educators. So when you actually can, when they feel equipped, even if they don't know everything or even they get corrected, they're the best. And kids want to hear from their parents about sex, which is kind of counterintuitive. I think people think that they don't. And it's hilarious when we do surveys. If you ask parents, did you talk to your kids about sex? They say, yes, we did. And then you ask kids, you survey the same kids, did your parents talk to you about sex? And they said, no, they didn't. So there's a little bit of a disconnect there about you think you had the conversation and you didn't. But I think that your example is a really good one, because what we also have learned at Planned Parenthood, just in being in these, in trying to teach parents, give them the tools that they need and also talk to young people, is just opening up the conversation, even if you don't have it all, and using those teachable moments means that at some point when your child needs to talk to you, either because they want to begin to be sexually active, or they get in a situation in which they're, either in an uncomfortable situation, or, God forbid, they get pregnant and they're not, ready to become a parent, they know they can at least come to you, that door is open. And if you don't open it up pretty early, it's hard later to go back and do that work. So I think, I don't want to put it all on parents, but I think there's a huge opportunity for parents. But they have to be supported by the outside society, too. That's what I was saying. It's not just parents' problem. It's not just the schools. I think as a society, we just have to make this a much more open conversation than we have. You may have some.
Well, Jeff, I think you make a good point about the information. I remember vividly, my mother is 83 now, has COPD. But when I was in grade school, she would send me to the drugstore with a note to the druggist asking the druggist to please sell me her cigarettes. And I don't know how many years it went on. And I knew even at that young age, 1960, that smoking was bad. And so if you remember, in 1964 is when the Surgeon General report came out saying that smoking is bad. I was in 8th grade, and I did my 8th grade science project on the Surgeon General's report, hoping to get my mother off cigarettes. And it didn't really work. But I do think that kids can be smarter than their parents, especially now with the internet, and not necessarily model bad behavior shown by the parents.
Yeah.
So in some sense, it seems like all the energy that we've talked about so far is dedicated to the teenage and college years. Are there other programs that are trying to help parents communicate better with these kids, or are we kind of giving up on that area and saying, okay, for the next 15, 20 years, we're going to just keep teaching teens, and then those will be the parents that will solve the problem later?
I'm pretty impressed with the advertising from the National Office of Drug Control Policy, trying to tell parents who themselves abuse drugs how to talk to their kids about drugs. I mean, that seems like a pretty good attempt to me.
Well, I want to make sure Daphne gets a chance to weigh in here. I think there's two things that we're really focused on, in addition to changing public policy so that the classrooms actually are a place where you can talk openly and give kids information about sex. I think the peer-to-peer issue is fundamental, and we've learned this. We run peer education programs, and every socioeconomic area, every geography, every culture, and it is for kids who don't feel comfortable talking to their parents, and there are a lot of them, and don't feel like there's someone in their, again, in a religious setting or in their schools, they will talk to other teens. And so we spend a lot of time actually training peer educators around America to then go into classrooms or go into other forums, and sometimes just to be sort of, in some ways, I think of like the Underground Railroad of sex education in America. I was in Portland, Oregon when I first started with Planned Parenthood. I met this young man who was a peer educator. He was a high school kid. So any of you guys who have sons in high school, and I'm thinking, why isn't my son like, the thought that he would do this. But it was this amazing young man who had been going through 2 years of learning everything about sex prevention, sexual health, and he was known all around school as like the kid who knew things. And he talked about being on the roof with his dad roofing. One weekend, his cell phone goes off, and it's a kid he doesn't even know who has a girl who's called him, who says she's had unprotected sex. She needs to know how to get emergency contraception. She doesn't know who else to call, and yet he's the kid that people know in the community to call. Now, this is not a very efficient way of providing sex education, but it actually works. And I think there are incredible opportunities. But the second piece of it, I would say, is besides the internet, we have to empower these kids not just to be sex educators, but to be leaders. So we actually just brought 200 teens to Congress last week, and it was to really talk to members of Congress about what it's like to be a teenager now and to be facing issues around sexual health and what they need. And I really think that it's much different, I think, as opposed to us teaching them. We've got to let young people lead a lot more than we ever have. I just think that the world is changing very quickly. And just like you teaching your parents, I think young people, particularly dealing with people in policy-making positions who are very far away from their first sexual experience, most of them, although not that far away from their most recent sexual experience, it's very hard for them to kind of put themselves back in that place, and I think young people can help do that.
No, I absolutely agree. I think young people have an especially important role in re-educating their parents about health and health issues as it regards to food, because I think that adults have established their habits, and sometimes it's hard for them to break. And whereas kids really are constantly reforming. And yes, certainly growing up in a healthy environment is helpful, and you adopt those healthy habits that your parents pass on to you. But you can lose those when you go to college if you don't have supportive peers around you. So I think, again, having peer groups that make it important and that make it maybe sexy and cool to be healthy and to think about these things not only as they relate to your body and to your own health and the health of those around you, but also on a global economy level, to the health of the environment. It's a much larger issue, I think, at hand. And I think that students learn that very quickly. They really quickly translate it into action. They're viral marketers, and they take it home, and they often influence their parents to start reevaluating their own choices in life.
So let's talk a little more about the peer pressure issue. It seems, at least historically, that negative peer pressure is a stronger force than positive peer pressure. Now, is that a fact, or is that just that we have not reached the tipping point where enough people are spreading this positive message where that becomes, as you said, the virus that spreads, and everyone kind of takes care of this problem on their own? It seems like once you get a sufficient college group that cares about sustainability, cares about local crop, et cetera, everyone is going to kind of go along with that eventually, and the pressure kind of switches over to positivity. Is that true for cigarettes? Is that true for sex ed as well?
I imagine it is. I just reflecting as you were asking a question about my own experience. One of the things that I was taught at home was, I can almost quote it, if everybody jumps in the lake, does that mean you're going to do it too? I mean, I think that's a very important thing to teach a child, is to think for themselves and not do things just because all their friends do. I mean, I remember my dad was a lawyer and later a judge. He said, if you're ever in a car, somebody says, let's stick up a gas station, you get out of that car. So, I mean, that stayed with me very young and caused me to resist things, doing things that maybe other friends would want me to do.
I just had a couple of thoughts. One is that in terms of peer pressure, I think that one important thing is that, and we see this a lot more. We see a lot more young men at Planned Parenthood than we ever have before. They're coming either for birth control, for condoms. Sorry, we couldn't help you, but there are a lot of young men who do. Exactly. You're probably way ahead of us. And we see a lot of young men coming for STD testing and treatment. And so one thing that's changed in terms of the peer thing is it's no longer a girl's problem, teen pregnancy or unintended pregnancy. And I think this is, of course, very healthy. That, in fact, it's, at least I'd say that's radically changed. And so I think the more that we make healthy sexuality and responsible sexuality and healthy relationships something that is a two-way street, I think is really, really, really good. The other thing, though, I think in terms of sort of peer pressure to have sex is, and it's not the topic for today, but I would say that a lot of the unintended pregnancies we see among young women are not as a result of consensual sex. And so I think we have to be really clear that, just as you're talking about, these food issues are not, it's just not like getting people apples instead of Doritos. It's like there's a complex set of things that work on with young people about understanding what does it mean to have a healthy relationship and to be in control and to be able to sort of set limits and to respect your body. And I think that's where, again, the interesting thing we see online when young people come and ask us questions online is everything from, like, my favorite one was like my boobs are 2 different sizes. Is this normal? It's like all those kinds of things that they want somebody to ask, like, my body's changing. It looks weird now. It's different. And so I think that there's a lot of things that young people want to talk to their parents about and other people about that aren't just about, like, prevention. They're literally about, like, how did you and Dad meet? And, like, how did you know that this was the first person you were going to have sex with? And I mean, they really want to figure out how to navigate the world beyond just how do you unroll the condom and put it on. And so I think we have to think about these things in a much more holistic way than simply prevention.
Questions in the back?
Charles, a question for you. I had an opportunity to interview a guy named Martin Lindback, whose mother died of lung cancer metastasized. And it's been spoken, which is not an unusual scenario. So Martin Lindback is one of the world experts in neuromarketing and understanding how human brain responds to advertising. And I wanted to run something by you mentioned and see what your thoughts on it are, because his point throughout all of his work has been that advertisements really don't work anymore. In our generation, when we were watching Mary Tyler Moore, you would recall about a third of the ad that you were exposed to. And the ad hit rate was about 2.5%. And in fact, they did an experiment taking the Marlboro Man, just the image of the man, put it on a big boulevard in Los Angeles, and they looked at how many people were smoking, thinking about smoking. It was actually quite high. When they added the Marlboro logo on it, it went down. It wasn't as effective. But as soon as you saw it in advertising, you held it. So the most powerful cigarette advertising right now is the Formula One racing cars in Europe, which are sponsored by cigarette companies. And one of them is the red Marlboro color. And on the very front, it's got little lines, those are barcodes. It's actually small cigarettes. As it races around the racetrack, it stimulates you to think about cigarettes. Of course, that's not an advertisement, because there's no cigarettes mentioned on it. It's just a little bit of a logo there. And I ask this because I think that unless we get a place where advertising really does happen now, which is not paid advertising, but contextual advertising, whether it's an education of food, Planned Parenthood type initiatives, or especially in the cigarettes, I don't think they really do this. And the most obvious opportunity is the film industry. So what do you think about the proposal? Because, we make films R-rated if they're sex in them or violent because we think it gives the wrong message to our kids. What do you think about the proposal of movies that you've heard of being rated R if they show cigarette smoking that is not important to the historical context?
Very much in favor of that. There is an organization, I should know the name and I don't, that really does monitor the smoking content in films. And I think it's fair to note that there are some films of a historical nature. I'm thinking about the one about Edward R. Murrow where everybody smoked, that, well, maybe that is a fair artistic portrayal of the times. But I'd be very much in favor of that. And I think that some depictions of smoking in art and films and whatnot is very damaging, and I'd like to see if we could control it. Just as you were asking your question, I know you will all remember this. How many remember the famous Yul Brynner public service ad that was shot before he died, and then after he died? That went on, and Yul Brynner looked like he was days away from dying, and he blamed his death on cigarettes. Well, the tobacco companies saw that, and they said, okay, we're going off television, because as long as they were on television, television stations had to run anti-smoking ads, and they couldn't stand that. So that one ad forced the industry off of television.
More questions, please.
I have a question about the college. So I just graduated a year ago from the University of Chicago. And I noticed, we have a dining hall set up where, there's a vegan station and there's a kosher station and there's a lot of options. But the second that you want to get an apple or you want to make a salad with the fresh ingredients, they weigh it, and it costs way more than going and making a sandwich or your pasta. So even on the meal plan, if you ate a salad every day for lunch, you would run out of money.
Wow.
And so however much, I grew up in the Bay Area and was very health conscious. I was very aware of what I was eating, but it was so much harder, even though it was there. They had fresh fruit and salads or whatever. With the socioeconomic status or, being a college student and financial situations being on your own, it wasn't really as applicable. And then, at least at the University of Chicago, a lot of people go off and meal plan after their first year, so then you're shopping at the grocery stores. And, fresh produce is more expensive.
Yeah.
Unfortunately,
I don't think that your situation was unique. I think that, and again, this is a much bigger issue, probably a topic for another day, but the way that we've set up agriculture in America and the way that we've endorsed certain industries and not others, and we burn literally tons of corn every day to keep prices stable because we have such an overproduction of it, and yet you on your college campus can't get a salad of lettuce and tomatoes for less than $10. That's just crazy. And I think that we as citizens, and especially you and I in our generation, need to make sure that we are doing everything that we can to make it so that American legislature knows that we demand healthier foods be available to us at a cost that is not only relative to what we're eating. So lettuce and tomatoes shouldn't cost you that much money. It's not that difficult to grow. We can grow it easily. We, in our country, have such a diversity of ecosystems. We can actually grow pretty much anything we like. And the fact of the matter is, they don't think there's a demand, and the demand for other things like 99-cent hamburgers is so high that they are focusing on supplying that issue and not the issue of people who want to really be health conscious and have it for something that won't break the bank. So,
a situation like I live in south side of Chicago. It's kind of worse. It's kind of static.
Right.
Everyone's just eating. They call it the food desert. I'm in medical.
I heard about this.
But they call it the food desert. So what kind of food is available to the society and the community in that area? And it's the only thing affordable is like fast food. And then you wonder why the kids are all obese.
You wonder why they're all obese. You wonder why they're all failing in school. You wonder why they can't sit still. You wonder why they're all being medicated for ADHD. These are all related issues, and I think that it's going to be really important to see how. I mean, if you look at just the example of McDonald's bringing in salads, that wasn't because they had some altruistic intention of like, oh, I should make some green available in my purveyor. I really think it was because they had people coming into their store saying, oh, there's nothing I can eat here, and turning away and leaving. And I think it's only if we do more things like that, and that's not to say you have to cut out all the good things or bad things, but or taste good that you like to enjoy. It's just to say that you need to demand that there be a variety that at an affordable cost that is accurate and acceptable.
Yes?
My granddaughter was making comments that I'm fat, which she wasn't at the time, but was concerned about body image and what was going on. I looked for information, and she, I think, was 9 or 10 at the time. I looked for information for her to learn more about nutrition. I really couldn't find anything, and I know you're talking about teens.
Yeah.
And it seemed that it's very young and very really not enough so that they could make good choices themselves. But I really couldn't find anything for that kind of preteen, early teen on good nutrition. And I'm wondering if you know what it is. That seems to me to be the time you need to get them before they get.
I think you're absolutely right.
So.
I think it's interesting. I think, again, it's an issue of it's not my fault, it's not my jurisdiction. I think that educators in schools feel like that should be taught at home. And unfortunately, I think that oftentimes, especially with maybe 2 working parents or a situation like that, there's not a lot of thought that goes into planning every day's meal. And then it becomes the 6-year-old's responsibility to feed themselves or to say, oh, this is good for me, this is bad for me, without the education in place to help them make really educated decisions. And I think, again, it really has to be a parental discussion and also a parental demand that kind of, just like sex ed, be taught in schools if they don't have the time or are too embarrassed to discuss it with their kids at home. I think that health education should, on a broader level and in terms of healthy eating, should definitely be discussed at home, at school rather. But I also think body image issues that young girls certainly have onset much earlier than any of us expect them to should also be addressed. And that said, I am hoping maybe to have my younger siblings help me write a book for a younger generation, because I do think it happens earlier than we're addressing it. So hopefully I'll have something for you soon.
Anything out there now? Is there anything at this point?
Well, what kind of things? I mean, I think that in terms of just teaching her what's good for you and what's not, that's easy. But again, she said she was, how old was your granddaughter?
Oh, I think this was when she was 9.
So she's old enough to be preparing some of her own foods. Like, you could teach her to make a sandwich on whole grain bread. You can teach her to do things for herself. And I think that kind of individualism, but also empowerment for her would be good in terms of taking back her health and realizing that she's doing something very good for her body for the long term.
Also a plug for Daphne's book. I can't resist. I'm sorry.
My publisher.
This is the time to be entrepreneurial, but really the reason that Daphne actually wrote that book was because Dr. Oz, who's sitting over here, knows that my company publishes a lot of health books for stuff for teens, said, oh, my daughter's really interested in this subject. She was in high school at the time. And would you be interested in doing a book on health for teenagers? And I said I was, and I first met her when she was a senior in high school. And so it was really that interest that led to, 3 years later, it morphed into a book for the college kids, The Dorming Diet. But it was really, it came out of just exactly what you're saying right now. And that's really, I mean, one of the our most successful series, I think you would know, Cecile, was the What's Happening to My Body books. Book for girls and book for boys, puberty education. And the author of that did that for her daughter when she was 11, because there was a need. So don't, I mean, I'm a book publisher in New York, but don't feel that you can't generate yourself information, because these kids have a tremendous appetite for learning at that age. And even going to your school librarian, believe me, I mean, I'd love it to be a Newmarket book, but I'm sure there's information out there now that you can impart on nutrition and good eating. And we'll talk about you and Arabella's doing. I'd like you were originally intended for the younger generation.
Yeah.
Would be great. And Daphne is doing a signing after.
Don't need to announce that. One other thing, and this is not going to provide any answer to your question, but one thing that really worries me about society is that businesses like the fashion industry, the beauty industry, function on fear. They function on anxiety. They exist and replicate and keep themselves going by triggering anxieties in people that they need to, fill some image. And I've been a counselor at MIT for undergrads for 5 years and have met many people that were led into eating disorders by one day when they were 10 years old, someone making one sentence of a comment about, oh, maybe you should be wearing something different, maybe you should be wearing a one piece instead of a two. Something like that can trigger this anxiety, and when you're in the society we're in, which is all based on anxiety and fitting in, that sets off a chain reaction that I don't know how we can stop it without actually fundamentally changing the society we're in. Right up front.
How about misinformation? I'm talking about the sexual and maybe the cigarette on the internet.
Yep.
Because they don't want to talk to the parents. They may not have the fears, but they are going to go into the internet.
Right.
Now, there's a lot of crap out there.
That's right.
How do we teach them to look for the right stuff?
Right. It's a great question, and I think this is why, in fact, we've shifted so much of our work online to both work with Google to make sure in terms of Google ad searches that you actually find a source of information that, like Planned Parenthood, where you actually can get real, sort of verifiable information. But it's not only, it's interesting, I think what we're learning, so we see, because Planned Parenthood is a name, and even though it's a name that started, 92 years ago, it's a name still that kids associate with information about sex and confidentiality and someplace they can go without fear of sort of shame and whatever. So if we see 500,000 kids a month online, but MTV or MySpace or Facebook sees millions more. And so one of the things we're now working hard with, and my friend Tom Subik actually is here, who runs our online division, and he has even more information on this than I do, is really now partnering with places that kids are already, to make sure that when they are looking for information about health, and most of the questions they ask about health do relate to sexual health, we're now partnering with those kinds of entities to say, let's link them up with good information. It's been fascinating. I think that, and I think everyone probably on the panel knows that now being a content provider online of good content is invaluable. And so I think now trying to find how do we link good content with the places that kids are, not just expecting that they're going to come and find us, is really, really critical. We just did a campaign, as an example, with MTV and the Kaiser Family Foundation and the CDC in April on STDs. Because last year when I read that 1 in 4 teenage girls had an STD, or STI, I was like, this is not acceptable. And so we actually partnered with them, and MTV did an enormous amount of free advertising. It was called the GYT09 campaign, which was Get Yourself Tested, which began to sort of have a conversation with kids about getting tested for an STI is just sort of a normal part of your health. It's not just for some kids, not for others. And so I think ways in which we can go and reach kids where they're coming online, give them the tools to take care of their health in a good way is really critical. Because you're right, there's a lot of garbage out there, and there's a lot of garbage out there about sex for sure. So it's more that how do we co-brand good information with providers of content that teens trust, like Facebook and like MTV and others.
Would you let me footnote this? I can't. Last year, about 18 months ago, we were up on the Hill trying unsuccessfully last year to get the FDA bill passed. We wanted evidence that tobacco companies are really marketing to kids. We wanted that. And so we had an internet contest asking kids through Facebook to go find examples. And we were deluged with back-to-school specials and whatnot. So it was a tremendous, no consulting firm could possibly have done as good as the kids did in sending us this information just because he asked them for it on the internet.
That's a great example.
Yes. The back.
I'm a social architect and a media producer, so I really applaud Dr. Oz's suggestion. I think it's brilliant to add another rating system to things. I'm also part of the sustainable communities, and there's a group, smoking, that how much in the terms of the new healthy lifestyles that we need to learn to be cool and hip, does this reflect, give it a cute little color logo or something like that. But I thought that idea really rocked, and maybe we could even expand it to cover other kinds of categories of movement. Right. I'm also a producer of a show here, a national show called Convenience, a platform for solutions, bringing the global brain trust together in balance with native wisdom. So we have a context, and we're showcasing solutions. So what you're doing, I want to talk more about it in power, because we've got some great kids here in the Valley that thought, where's my place going to be? They were raised here, it's now so much more expensive, all things going on. They studied permaculture with some of the experts in the Valley. So we went from sustainable into the whole permaculture. And now they've started on a station called Common Sense. And they go knock on doors and say, hey, do you want me to turn your lawn into a garden, an organic garden? So even if you only have 2 square feet or a whole lot, whatever. Right. So it's expanding the idea. And when you talk about nature and permaculture and how everything in nature supports itself and the beauty of that, what we found in talking with teens about all the subject areas we want to talk about, and certainly sex education fits in with nature, you've got a bigger context. You're talking about natural elements and metaphors, and we've got these wonderful elders from some of the Ute reservations here that have been just fabulous in explaining how Mother Earth and Father Sky work together. Yeah. So it's just a nice context. Definitely invite you to be part of it.
Thank you.
One comment I want to say about the ratings is I deal with a lot of college kids and coming from high school, and especially in an MIT tech environment. Maybe this makes me cynical, but a rating system and its ability to actually halt people's access to these movies, I don't believe that it's as strong as we think it is. And I don't believe it's as strong as it was 3 years ago, because I know I can get on the internet and in 2 minutes find a movie that's in the theaters that's rated R and steal it for free. And there's no problem, and I don't see that going.
The issue isn't stopping kids from watching them. When you make a movie R-rated, it is a very deliberate choice by a movie maker. They don't want the movie to be R-rated. They know you can get around it, but they need to make money. So it's not about the kids watching it or not. It's about giving filmmakers, it's a very subtle thing. But I'm going to show Brad Pitt go like this before he fires the gun, or do not go like this. And so that's an R-rated decision, which is how they make decisions about sex. And sometimes you need sex to move. It's important to the storyline. You're not going to compromise the creative process. I don't like the idea of banning it, because I do think that violates the ability of the filmmaker to make the movie. The R-rating creates a financial penalty that's inherent in the process, which is the same reason it works for sex and for violence. And so unfortunately, actually, that's not my idea. This idea has been around. We haven't really get very far. The question really is, how do you get it done? And I do think it'll have the desired impact.
Please. It's kind of odd, I have to say. It's ironic as I listen to this, because a group called the Lung Cancer Alliance is in Washington, sublet space from the Motion Picture Association of America that does the rating. So I think maybe we'll send them a letter. Yeah.
The head of the HPA is here.
Yeah, right, exactly.
Sure.
If I understood you correctly, I thought you talked about educating children about cigarettes without fear. And my question is, has there been any research done that fear is a bad way to educate them, to stay away from certain things like, obviously it's a bad way to educate them for most things, but in terms of cigarette smoking and drugs, for children who can't quite associate consequences with actions, I'm wondering if fear is not a good way.
You could be right, and maybe we're overstating that. We think in preference to I think kids are very sensitive to attempts to scare them. And so I think they're probably more responsive, I would defer to you, on attempts to inform them. So I think fear has its place, but I think our preference is to the information piece of it.
But in terms of cigarettes, sex is a whole different subject, but cigarettes, they don't have far-range thinking to realize that while it might be cool now, in 20, 30, 40 years, they'll be paying a big price.
What's the scare tactic in that? Like, you'll die if you smoke? Well, you will die if you smoke. That's not scary.
Southeast Asia on the cigarette. Horrific images of people with teeth, and they're on the cigarettes. And why?
But I think in the New York subway system, they have a woman right now. I think she's probably like in her 50s, and she's missing 8 of her 10 digits. They're like cut down to different parts. And I mean, I'm 23. I'm probably who that ad is geared towards, and I definitely noticed that, and definitely thought to myself, A, I didn't know that could happen, and B, got me thinking about, well, my friend who smokes a pack a day, should I point this out to them and maybe get them thinking about it? So I think that scare tactics, not in sex necessarily, but definitely in cigarettes, do work a little bit better maybe.
Well, I have to say, I mean, I can't let this session pass without complimenting the doctor. About 18 months ago, Oprah did a show about smoking, and were kind enough to call us, and we geared up and make sure we were ready for 1 million internet hits. But you demonstrated a healthy lung and a smoker's lung, which scared me to death when I saw it on TV. So.
Can I just get, this issue is, I spent a lot of time on this. As a heart surgeon, one of the difficult decisions I have is how to deal with people who are smoking and needing heart surgery. So I've always told them that because I like, because I care about you, I'm not going to operate if you smoke. And I spent a lot of time trying to figure out how to get them to stop smoking so I can fix the deeper problems they have. Scare tactics generally don't work in kids. Again, this is not my research, but I've done some homework on it, looking into it. Because kids do it to rebel. And most kids, like we were when we were teenagers, think we're immortal. So it's part of the rebellion to go in the face of death and still smoke. But the idea with it was on the stage on that, which is very important to what we don't do. When you see the same warning sign in every cigarette, all that does is turn on the insulin, which is the part of your brain that's stimulated when you smoke. All you're doing is reminding people to smoke. What we really need to be able to do is change those ads so you don't get used to them. So, and the new ads become iconic and reflective. So I think we ought to have pictures of deformed people on cigarettes. They ought to be ugly and different each time. Enough so that you don't get used to seeing the same thing. The whole package needs to change, which means you take over exactly what the cigarettes look like. That ultimately is what the FDA, I think, will do.
That is in the law. In fact, I can quote you those 2 pieces. The new law will only allow the tobacco companies to display black and white, text-only advertisements in stores where tobacco products are sold. Graphic warning labels are required to appear on the top 50% of the front and back of all cigarette pads. Now, let me note, since we're here in Aspen, and I'm sure there's a heavy dose of civil libertarians here in this neck of the woods, that there is a certain large, famous civil liberties organization that opposed this law on First Amendment grounds because they thought it was an infringement of First Amendment rights. And, of course, this organization has taken a lot of tobacco money over the years. So I feel I should put that notion here in the room that that's going to be part of the battle. And that this is just the first shot, and this is going to be fought in the courts of whether this is constitutional to do, just as you're saying, Doctor, to infringe or limit upon the cigarettes company's ability to advertise.
There was a very weird case study where in Northern Africa, they were trying to get people to use soap to stop transmission of disease. And they would put all these ads in and say, use soap, you'll stop the transmission of disease. And it did absolutely nothing. Didn't solve the problem at all. They hired an advertising agency who made a sequence of ads that had people leaving the bathroom having not washed their hands, covered in purple and looking totally disgusting. And instead of it feeling like a long-term problem that you were going to have to deal with, it felt like you were immediately affected and disgusting. And it totally turned around the whole culture in a very short amount of time. So I think there's different ways we can leverage fear, and especially when you're a teenager and you're not thinking about 30 years down the line, you're thinking about this week. There's ways to target that part of the brain differently.
If I could I really like what you've said, Dr. Oz, too, because I think this is just my sort of small slice on this in terms of how do we change the normalization of sexual behavior and sort of healthy behavior. It's so taboo even to talk about condoms in this country. It's incredible, right? So, but if you look at a country like Thailand, there was a really great story, in Times Magazine when Thailand was really wanted to prevent the spread of HIV/AIDS. And so there was, with the government and with, sort of the commercial industry, just a massive national campaign that when you have sex, you use a condom. It doesn't matter if you're a sex worker. It doesn't matter if you're a married couple not wanting to have whatever it was. It just began to normalize and mainstream condom use. So it was no longer a taboo. It was something that everybody did, and it made an enormous impact. And yet we still in this country, obviously we spent the last 8 years being unwilling even to talk. The only conversation about condoms happening with young people in public schools schools in America was that they don't work, right? Teaching young people that they don't always work. And so, of course, we now have a generation of young people who've grown up thinking, why bother, right? Why bother? And so we begin to see now STI rates going up, teen pregnancy rates going up. So we've got to find ways to partner, in a much bigger, sort of profound public way to just say we need to normalize healthy sexual health, and when we do, we can make a huge impact. But it's gonna require a lot more than the schools and Planned Parenthood.
Back to here.
I just want to talk about this smoking fear concept, I guess. I think so I'm a co-leader of a program called ASAP, which is Adolescent Substance Abuse Prevention Program. And we go to 6th through 8th graders in the southside of Chicago. We bring human organs, we bring things that are healthy. And when we show these kids, like, this is a healthy lung, this is a smoker's lung, like, you get this huge impact. We have them fill out surveys, we keep contact with them over X amount of months to see if they retain it. A lot of them will say, oh, I went home and told my mom it was really bad that she was smoking. And, you saw them cirrhotic livers, from alcohol abuse. And, I think even though that's scary and they're kind of like, whoa, is that really, like, a real heart that, has X, Y, Z? It's scary, but it's true. It's same with obesity. Like, instead of having, like, a self-image, like, you're not supposed to be fat because the media says so. But as opposed to being like, well, if you're fat, you're probably going to get diabetes and you're going to have all these health problems and you're going to, it's scary, but it's true. And I think they really respond to something that's honest. Where if you smoke, this is what your lungs going to look like. These are human lungs, someone who died. Like, they respond to it. Even 6th, 7th, and 8th graders. And I feel like if you target them when they're young and you show them true, like, honest things, I feel like they're going to respond. So there's no way to look at it and be like, oh, sure. My life can happen. Like, it won't look like that if I smoke.
Right.
The traveling show Body Worlds, in case you don't have a program locally, not only has lung comparison, but it has a 500-pound obese patient, and you can see the compression of every organ in their body. And that, to me, was something that you can't replace with any other experience. We have time for one or two more questions. Please, the front orange.
I have 5 children, and they're 17 years old, the former youngest and the 5-year-old now. And I've been a miserable failure on the smoking issue with the older boy. What age and what do you find most effective to keep kids from smoking? I'm not a smoker, so it wasn't that they're so often smoking.
We decided that with our limited resource, the best way is to carry our message to Capitol Hill. And we're very happy that we have this law in place now that will, starting July 1st, and in stages thereafter, attempt to limit the ability of big tobacco to get into the hearts and minds of our kids. As I mentioned, we do have some programs, but they reach, in comparison to the whole country, relatively few people. But we've got Lung Association chapters all over the country that pretty much do offer these kinds of programs. It's a very tough problem, and I think the key is, and I'll be talking about this in a half an hour in a big idea session, is prevention, is keeping people off it in the first place, because it's very hard. 80% of smokers who really want to quit. Even they wish they could quit and know it's really hard. So it's pretty tough to get people off cigarettes once they're on. I mean, Senator Chris Dodd, who took up the torch when Senator Kennedy couldn't be part of that bill, was a smoker himself and said how very difficult it was to quit smoking. Senator Frank Lautenberg, who was the big co-sponsor of the bill, stood up and said he'll never forget his young daughter saying, "Daddy, why do you smoke?" And that's made him quit. So it's a very tough problem.
I guess my question more is not how I get the older ones off of cigarettes. Some have quit and some are still smoking. But it's what do I do about this 5-year-old? Yeah. And what are the resources out there to keep her from smoking?
I would like to say something. My father died of emphysema, and when my kids were young, we went to the Museum of Science in Boston, and I saw the same image of a healthy lung and a sick lung. Fortunately, my kids never smoked, and I think that is so powerful.
Because I think your youngest will model the behavior of his older siblings. That, I think, is a real risk factor, probably. I mean, a huge problem we have is the military. The smoking in the military is much higher than it is in civilian populace. 20% of the civilian American civilian populace smokes. 30% of the military. Why is that? Those kids get over there and they see their sergeants, people who they admire, and they're smokers. They pick it up. So 50% of the people of the young troops coming back from Iraq and Afghanistan are smokers, and they weren't before. So I think that modeling behavior is a very powerful force.
And we got time for one more.
Just a comment. Maybe going back to the, I don't know who went to the happiness or joy talk right before this. I think that has a lot to do with it as well. Joy. They may not, lack of stress.
Okay, we do have time for the last one.
I just want to mention, I lived in Indonesia years ago when they were the most explosive population in the world, and I was part of their campaign to reduce, it's called Dua Lima, to give condoms to everyone in the country to look at it. And they had such a united, of course it's a police state, so they can't, it's not much of a democracy, so they can really focus on things. But President Suharto got the award for lowering the population. It was amazing with a culturally appropriate, intergenerational campaign that was really thought out and put out there. And they changed the most populous part of the world down to where it's cool now just to have 2 children or less. And it's so one of the things, there's so many different organizations here that we all have a similar message that we want to go. Now there's the political will in Washington to really welcome these messages. For us to collaborate on these so that we can get the healthy images out as a whole new culture.
That's right.
And redefine our culture now that it's been at least redefined for a while.
I think that's right. And I do think, if there was sort of one thing that all this comes together is if we're talking about like having a healthier generation than the one that, sort of either we were in or the one that's sort of coming of age now, I think is a huge opportunity and to really focus on what does it mean to be a healthy young person in America. And that means, preventing, not starting smoking early, having access to healthy foods, and obviously thinking about your body and thinking about sexual health in a way that is normal, mainstream, not weird and icky and, sort of the unspoken stuff. And I do think young people can help us through this. I don't think we have to figure out all these answers. I think I have learned more in the 3 years I've been with Planned Parenthood. I have learned more from teenagers than all of my colleagues put together because they understand what it's like right now to be a teen in America. So we have to listen to them, I think, as well.
All right, I want to remind everyone that Daphne has a book signing.
Yay, Daphne!
I just want to thank all the speakers, Chuck, Cecile, and Daphne for joining us.